how the violence of state Azerbaijani policy evolved during time.
They were completely not interested in instigating violence. It's called televised or televiolence or demonstrative violence, performative violence.
Aliyev's policy and the violence as a mechanism in his state policy actually puts Azerbaijan in a bad, difficult situation, complicated.
The Armenians themselves, because the message was, you are humiliated and never again dare to confront or resist. So it's trying to break the identity, and now you have to know your new place. Your new place is nowhere.
Today our guest is social anthropologist and researcher Nona Shahnazarian.
Nona Shahnazarian is an associate researcher at the National Academy of Sciences, Yerevan, Armenia, and head of the Center for Independent Social Research Armenia, Yerevan. She was a foreign visiting fellow at the Armenian Research Center, Dearborn-Michigan University, USA 2015, and at Stanford University 2016-2017. She has conducted extensive fieldwork in Russia, Armenia, Georgia, the USA and Nagorno-Karabakh, and has published on the issues of gender, war, migration, memory, and diaspora in the Caucasus and Russia.
Nona, thank you for accepting our invitation and being our honored guest today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Today we will speak about a very important article that you published, your research about the violence, types of violence, and especially displaced violence of during Armenian-Azerbaijani war in Nagorno-Karabakh, and very interesting article. My first question is about if you compare with the first Nagorno-Karabakh war in 1990s and you compare the violence of 44-day Artsakh war, how the violence of state Azerbaijani policy evolved during time. Do you see any difference and new mechanisms?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. And I would like to stipulate that the article is not published yet, and it's forthcoming soon in Finland. And because I was part of summer school as a teacher and instructor, and the summer school was called Violence of Tradition and Tradition of Violence. Mm-hmm. And this is part of that. But also, I would like to say that you are completely right, that the classifications of violence and in the way that how state use violence and its monopoly on violence, and how in which extent violence is a criteria of statehood. Then we can see two completely different handwritings, and if we just shortly try to compare it, because it's $1 million question, so I will just try to be short to explain my understanding, how I see that during the First Karabakh War, the model of violence was, of course, speaking about the crisis of statehood, and first of all the crisis of ideology of people's friendship, and most of all that the Kremlin and central authority was unable, in the context of disintegration of the USSR, control this unleashed ethnic violence in Azerbaijan and other republics of the former USSR. In that sense, we can see that the actors of violence would be quite different. First of all, I believe that the Soviet authority in Baku, they were completely not interested in instigating violence, and actually it would speak about the failed Azerbaijani Soviet statehood, and this is why they were not interested to instigate the violence. And more than that, as a person who has this background of being a refugee from Azerbaijan, I remember even that Azerbaijani authority would display Indian films and soap opera kind of films, so that to keep people at home rather than going to meetings, to rallies, rather than rallying, this ethnic, these meetings fueled by ethnic hatred, and they wanted to keep them at home. So then which other social actors were involved and interested in that violence? Of course, these newborn political parties, mostly with the ideas of nationalistic sentiments, they would fuel that violence. And I have to say that rumors were very important. Rumors, disinformation, fake narratives, they were very important in instigating that time violence. Plus, there was, there were so many clusters, and I have to say that also the Operation Kalso, the Operation Ring, that was kind of state-sponsored violence, and it was directed to stop the national movement, this self-determination, the movement of Armenians in Karabakh. So I can see at least 2+ actors who would, kind of fuel this violence. And compared to what happened in 2020, I can say that these two types of violence were completely different, as I told, and the whole context, the background of that violence, social context of those violences were completely different, in sense that Azerbaijani post-Soviet state was in a big political crisis, and there was a big fight and big struggle for getting out of a colonial power of Moscow. At the same time, all these different local or Azerbaijani actors, they were in fight with each other, and this created this power vacuum, which actually in a way helped Armenians to win that first war, even if the victory was Pyrrhic, still. In 2020, we can see that Aliyev, the junior, he actually invested a lot to craft a new ideology, a new pillars of Azerbaijanism, of this nationalistic, quite cruel ideology based on Khojalı massacre, and it's an example of competition of victimhoods, to dichotomize. There was Armenian genocide, but also there was this Khojalı massacre, and this is why we have to revenge. And this was already completely new kind of narrative, and a big niche, a big cluster of that narrative was revenge, dehumanization, hatred, ethnic hatred towards Armenians.
So can we conclude that actually during the first Artsakh war, it was a kind of the head of the Azerbaijani government, it tried to keep the power. But in the second war, in 2020, 44-day Artsakh war, it's like violence, it's like demonstrating the power. So now changing the goal of the state is against the violence, is the tool and mechanism for the state policy. But in the first case, we deal with the keeping the power. On the second case, we are seeing that the head of the Azerbaijani government wants to show his power, his own strength, his almighty power, and different types of violence actually, and using it.
Yeah, you are quite right, and I would just a little bit rephrase what you said, that in first case, it was completely failed state, because the state which was failed, and how we learned that the state is failed and dysfunctional, because they couldn't control this, they couldn't exercise a monopoly on violence. And this means that the state and its institutions, they didn't work in first case. And in second case, we know that that everything is under control of this dictator, and this dictatorial authoritarian regime can control everything is going on in his, in sense of exercising violence. He can control, this one person can control it, even if he cannot control it. Still, he is quite mild, and he doesn't want to discourage grassroots loyalty, because then we have this contradiction. If for 20 plus years all institutions, governmental institutions, would convey that message that we have to revenge, and we will do that, we will change the domination, these dominant relationships, etc., etc. So then he felt like it could be contradictory right now to say, no, you can stop, or you can do this, you can do that. So feel good and do what you want. That was the idea. And later on, if I have chance, I will tell you, if you are interested, how this situation put the Azerbaijani government, namely this one person, in a quite difficult situation.
I wanted to ask about this, we will speak of course, but Aliyev's policy and using violence is not only ethnic. The typology that you researched, of course we see that this violence has also another typology, like gender violence. We see them generational violence, towards the old people and young people, towards the women and men. So what do you think? It's not only ethnic, but have other layers as well. What your research shows on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I have plenty of materials on that, and plenty of insights from different actors of the research and research participants. And I would say that you are quite right, and I would say that we have to lean here on some theoretical works on the topic, that there is this gendered or gender sensitive violence as a part of many wars. And Nira Yuval Davis, a sociologist who exemplified the war in the Gulf, explaining how the woman body is connected to the idea of nation and the ideology of nationhood. Actually, if we take these ideas and try to put it on our case, then we can see that during the Second Karabakh War, 2020, you know why I always refer to Second Karabakh War? Because my article is called televised or televiolence or demonstrative violence, performative violence. Just because, when people, exercise violence or show their violence in front of camera, then there is no doubt that the violence happened, that it's not rumors. The people who exercise violence, they don't even try to, many of them, they don't try to hide their identity because they want, because the whole ideology in Baku, they heroized that model
Definitely.
of behavior, and we have this Safarov case.
Yes.
And that Safarov case was actually modeled for many people, for many soldiers, and they were very proud to show their faces. So I would say that once again, and it's quite kind of reiterated in special literature, then that women's body become how to say, become a paper on which Azerbaijani soldiers can script their message and send that message. And also you can see that the idea, this many years of ideological pressure on that people, and this humiliation, terrible humiliation they experienced, you can see that they actually show it in their attitude to women. Let's say in Hadrut in October, mid-October of 2020, a 53 years old woman who couldn't just leave the place because she had her physically challenged mother and she couldn't leave her there, and they were caught and they were tortured and their body was dismembered. So all that, you know, the whole question is quite stereoscopic and multi-layered, and I'm trying to show at least one or two, you know, aspects of that violent behavior. And you know, the message, it's always a message there. They send you telegrams, you know, they want to tell you something, and they do. And new technologies, it helps them very much to make it like very quickly. So the second example, as you surely know, is about how they treated women who transgressed their gender role, like traditional passive gender role, and they took to defend their children, their homeland, their country, and they were quite bitterly cruel. And these two women, again, were tortured and their bodies dismembered. And this time the message was different, you know. You have to know your place. As a woman, you have to sit down on your kitchen, not coming to fight front, with me. I think, you know, we can elaborate on, we can continue, but I think, you know, it's really there is this huge feminist critique of that kind of how nationalism actually clashes with feminist theory. That's very interesting.
So not only actually torture is a violence or the dismembering of people, but their bodies, but also forcibly displacement is a kind of violence when they forcibly made people to migrate from their homeland. And of course they shoot it on cameras. What was interesting, actually, it was a violence in front of the camera, and they forced people to say that they are leaving their homeland because of their will. Otherwise, maybe they will shoot, because there were also some videos spread that there was a Azerbaijani soldier with a gun and with a threat that if you didn't say this on camera, you will be dead. And this was also a kind of violence. Do you research this as well, and is another type of violence?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there are so many ethical questions. And why we actually use this mental mapping methodology for that particular reason. For that specific reason, we can't ask people that kind of direct questions, and we should only give them opportunity to tell something in different ways they feel comfortable with. So we gave them a piece of paper and we asked them to draw something, and this is how some information would come up. There was no special intention to extract exactly that information. So I would say that that's for sure. First of all, I wanted to clarify with putting the not right, but the terminology we have on our disposal. And the terminology is extralethal violence. Extralethal violence, this term was coined by Lee Ann Fuji, great Canadian sociologist, and she wrote a book on which I leaned big time. The title is Showtime, and this is about Rwanda genocide, and she tries to compare Rwanda genocide with lynch and this civil war violence in the US, so that do not dichotomize global north and global east, and Bosnian case, so that to say in the heart of Europe, all that things also can happen. Not can happen, they actually they happen. Somehow they always happen. Nothing, and you know, they happen again and again and again, even though we say never again. This is the idea, and this is why she brings a lot of new terms, so that to get rid of, somehow to avoid using people's language like atrocities. Still we will use that language, but extralethal violence is something which can be compared with the term overkilling coined by Randall Collins in his seminal book Violence and Micro Perspectives. This really almost as far as it is possible, complete explanation of types and models of different kind of violence, and you can see that domestic violence is so different compared to gendered violence in different contexts than wartime violence, you know, so.
Exactly, yeah. The thing is that, we were speaking previously about that Aliyev's policy and the violence as a mechanism in his state policy actually puts Azerbaijan in a bad, difficult situation, complicated. But I wanted to know, is it okay? Because is it right? Is it really Azerbaijan in a difficult situation? Because till now, actually, Azerbaijan continues its policy. It didn't change in anything under the international pressure, under the international organizations, I don't know, announcements, etc. And even after Armenia ratified Rome Statute in 2023, and it is already in the law. So my question is, why do you think that Azerbaijan now is politically or geopolitically is in a bad, difficult situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. But let me first complete the previous one. You asked that the whole process of exodus and the whole process of blockade and pushing people to go out is, in a way, absolutely. It is a violence, it's a psychological violence, and what is interesting, again, extracting from the mental mapping and interviews, how people, why they were, after, of course, why, it's like this is like a rhetorical question, of course, after 9 months of living in, I'm not even speaking about hunger, but in such an extreme fear and uncertainty and being in a limbo, how, and in the end of the day, being said through different kind of channels that the male part of Karabakhi population maybe is not going to go out alive. Maybe they will be arrested or even killed. Yes. And this was the biggest pressure. And the emotional response to this huge pressure was that when people, crossed the border to Armenia, they would stop the engine, come out. Some of them would cry to sky as loudly as they could to get rid of that pressure. Some of them would smoke in deep silence to feel a sense of themselves, to get their identity of normal person back. So in that sense, I think that was kind of the last point of this huge pressure which started in 1988. Yes. We had no time to speak about that part, but that time violence, ethnic violence toward Armenians, just because that is not topic of our today's conversation. But continuing, trying to answer your next question, I think the puzzle here is that that Azerbaijani televised and performative violence and the violence that can be tiraged like in 1 second, in 1 minute, all TikTok, Facebook, other publics, they could see Armenians, all kind of audiences could see their deeds, their heroism, quote unquote. But very soon, and also the messages, you can feel, you can see, you can hear that the messages are sent to different audiences. And who are those addressees? First of all, Azerbaijani people themselves. Look, we are dominant again. We are changing the domination and this power relationship, and we rewrite how it used to be and how it should be, and that was the message, and plus it was like kind of make Azerbaijan great again in Azerbaijani way, right? That was one audience. The second audience, of course, I would say even first audience was the Armenians themselves, because the message was you are humiliated and never again dare to confront or resist. So it's trying to break the identity, and now you have to know your new place. Your new place is nowhere. You do not exist. One do not like Armenians, and it's full of hatred and hate speech. And the third audience, they actually didn't want that audience, but they exist. People from outside. So, people like some Armenian NGO activists, they actually downloaded all those videos. Sure. And we can see that immediately, as soon as the first reactions from the Europe or European countries or from international organizations would happen, they immediately become cleaning the internet space, cleaning out and erasing all those videos. But it's not easy at all.
Thank you. Our guest was social anthropologist and researcher Nona Shahnazarian.